We are in 2 John. We've outlined this epistle as the greeting. We've called it Regards in the Truth because he sends his regards, and the focus is on truth. That's verses 1 through 3. Verses 4 and 5 remain in the truth. One of the things that he expresses to the elect lady whom he addresses is his celebration in having found that her children walk in truth. Verse 4, I rejoiced greatly when I found of thy children walking in truth, as we have received a commandment. Words to keep in mind in studying this epistle. Love, which he mentions in verse 1, verse 3, verse 5, verse 6. Truth, verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, verse 4. But also commandment. Commandment, verse 4, commandment, verse 5, commandment, verse 6. Truth, commandment, and doctrine, verses 9 and 10. By the way, the doctrine of Christ is the commandment of God, and it's truth. When you read truth, commandment, doctrine, yes, each has slightly different connotations, but in the epistle of 2 John, they very much point to the same body of truth, the gospel of Christ. Now, those things being said, it's also important to keep in mind, as John gives his regards in the truth and encourages this elect lady pertaining her children who remain in truth, and him encouraging her to remain in truth. Picking up at verse 7, there are many deceivers that are entered into the world. There's a sense in which he's going to emphasize recognizing untruth, verses 7 through 9. There we go. We'll skip over this part pertaining to remain in the truth. Verses 7 through 9. We've outlined this section thus. We're going to give it the heading of beware of. And the reason we're going to give it the heading of beware of is verse 8 begins with the words look to. Now, in our English language, we have look to. Other translations have beware. The Greek word translated look or beware is the word blepo. Every time I hear blepo, I think bleep, bleep, bleep. I'll do it one more time just to be annoying. Bleep. I realize I'm getting to where I'm not so young, and the film memories in my mind are a bit grainier and sometimes still in black and white. But are any of you like me and you can remember those old depictions of radar? You had that sweeping radius going all around a circle, and every time it would pick up on an object, bleep, bleep. When I read blepo, I think radar. Have your radar working. Bleep, bleep. John tells these brethren, look to yourselves. Have your radar ready. So let's talk about this radar they need. Beware of, and blepo does carry the idea of look or look out for. Radar works. Be aware of lying teachers. Verse 7, many deceivers are entered into the world who confess not that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist. John has already spoken extensively about this idea of Antichrist. He wrote of Antichrist 1 John 2:18, 1 John 2:22 and 23, 1 John 4 verses 2 and 3. This idea of Antichrist being the word John uses to describe the major body of false doctrine, or the different assortments of false teachers that are promoting themselves in that day, the Gnostics, the one that claimed to have some sort of special truth that they were essentially digging out of their hip pockets. John says, beware of these liars. The word for in verse 7 connects, for there are many deceivers, with what he said before. Back in verses 5 and 6, he said, I beseech thee, lady, not as though I wrote a new commandment unto thee, but that which we had from the beginning, love one another. I'm begging you, love each other. Verse 6, this is love. Here's what love looks like. We're going to follow His commandments. Loving one another means loving God first and foremost and following His commandments. Remember, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. John 14:15. Love one another, and this is what love looks like. We walk after His commandments, and this is the commandment, that if you have heard from the beginning, so that we should walk in it. So love one another, love the Lord, heed His commandments. Because many deceivers are entered into the world. The reason John enjoins love upon his audience and a love for God and a love for each other is because there are liars out there. And their goal is to permeate congregations of God's people so as to spread like leaven and defile the very doctrine that's being taught there. John encourages Christians love each other. You ever thought about our relationship with each other as being part of our defense against false doctrine? Our love for one another is part of our fortification that helps us to identify where love and truth are not. John says love one another, and this is love, that we keep His commandments. This is the kind of love that obeys God, that looks out for one another. But there are those deceivers that are entered into the world. They don't confess that Christ has come in the flesh. This is the docetic flavor of the flavor of the Gnostics, the ones that refused to accept that Jesus was actually a material being. They claimed that He only seemed to be physical. We've discussed these different flavors of Gnostics before. We're not going to taint our taste buds with them again, but we want to move forward. John says this is a deceiver and an antichrist. It's worth noting that John has already made the point that they had heard that Antichrist would come, and even now there are many antichrists in the world, 1 John 2. The idea of antichrists pertained to those false teachers that were there then. Their doctrine was contrary to Christ. Without belaboring the point that Antichrist is not some individual that we still await to arise in prominence today, John addressed the false doctrine of those Antichrist people in his day. And he tells faithful brethren, verse 8, you beware of those lying teachers, because they're going to cause you to lose your treasures. You look to yourselves, bleep, blepo, that we lose not those things which we have wrought, but that we receive a full reward. Lose not. Keep that word lose in mind. We're going to come back to it. The things which we have wrought. The English Standard and American Standard have that ye lose not the things which we have wrought. We read the King James and it says that we lose not the things which we have wrought. But it seems to be more of the case that John's saying, don't you, brethren, lose the things that we've worked to supply. Speaking from the perspective of an apostle, being the last living apostle. Don't lose the inspired message, the truth. Don't lose the progress that's been made. Don't lose what you've been taught, but receive a full reward. Now please understand, John isn't teaching some idea of earning salvation. John's words are perfectly in agreement with everything else taught in the New Testament pertaining to the relationship between grace, faith, and works. It's by grace that we're saved. Not of ourselves, it's the gift of God. Not of works, lest anyone should boast. It's by grace that we're saved, Ephesians 2:8, through faith. Grace, that's God showing us favor. The opportunity to be saved, the instruction and the warning that comes along with it. Faith is us taking advantage of His grace, trusting it, believing it, enough to work. We are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works. By the way, that's Ephesians 2:8, 9, and 10. We could skip over to James 2:17, faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. The point to make here is this. Time and again in the New Testament, the point is emphasized that God's grace should motivate man's faith, which produces works of obedience, not works of merit that are trying to earn a reward, but works of obedience that are taking advantage of God's grace. John says, look to yourselves that we lose not those things which we've wrought, but that you receive a full reward. There's a reason why Paul would say, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, 1 Corinthians 15:58. For as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord, because when we decide we're going to give up, when we work most of the day of our life, and then right at the end decide I'm cutting off early, we'll lose the reward. Revelation 2:10, be thou faithful unto death, that is up to and including death, and I'll give thee a crown of life. Once again, time and again, the exhortation is given in the New Testament pertaining to faithfulness unto death. The earlier in life we start following Him, better off we are. But it's also vital that we remember that it's not about how early we start. It's going to be about how we finish. Are we going to serve Him to the end, no matter when the beginning was? Now, continuing to move forward, John says, you beware of those lying teachers that will cause you to lose your treasures. Look to yourselves that we lose not the things which we've wrought. The word translated lose, the Greek word is apalumi. When you read the book of Revelation, you're going to read about Abaddon and Apollyon, a Greek and a Hebrew word, both conveying the idea of destruction. Apalumi is connected to the Apollyon idea. Apalumi, destroy. John says, you get your radar working so that you are careful not to destroy, not just lose as like so many people with their car keys. Not just lose. How often a day do you hear that sound of someone having lost their iPhone and so they're doing Find My iPhone, whatever sound they've got it programmed to do? That's not the lose we're discussing. Not lose as in, oh no, where did I put it? We're talking about lose as in utter ruin. We're talking about lose as in destroying, working against, disassembling. John says, look to yourselves so that we don't destroy, so that you don't destroy the work which we've wrought, but instead that you receive a full reward. So beware of the lying teachers, because they will cause God's people not only to lose sight of where they're going, but to destroy the Lord's work. Oklahoma, once one of the leading congregations in that area, has now joined together with a 5-campus strong community church. Look to yourselves that ye destroy not that which we've wrought. The same's true today. Brethren, we have to be careful lest we destroy what the Lord has supplied for us, what the apostles worked to deliver, what God's providence has preserved for us in His Word for us to follow, what so many of even our more recent brethren have labored in the efforts of restoration to help open eyes and turn people toward the truth. Blepo, look to yourselves. John puts responsibility not on the elders of a congregation, although they have a duty to be shepherds and watching over the flock. But John tells Christians, look to yourselves. Each Christian has a duty to decide, I'm not just going to swallow hook, line, and sinker every bait that someone casts. I'm not just going to believe blindly everything that someone says just because he's standing behind a pulpit. Please do me the favor and double check anything that comes out of these lips. They did it to Paul, Acts 17. They were more noble than they of Thessalonica, and that they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the Scriptures daily, whether those things were so, Acts 17:11. That same mindset's what's taught here. Just like John told his audience, 1 John 4:1, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they're of God. You test the teaching. Same idea is conveyed here. So look to yourselves. Beware of lying teachers. Beware of losing the treasure, what's been wrought. And those lying teachers that will cause you to lose your treasures will also cause you to leave the truth. Verse 9, whosoever transgresseth and abideth not in the doctrine of Christ hath not God. He that abideth in the doctrine of Christ hath both the Father and the Son. The statement made in verse 9 is given in both the positive and a negative way. Transgresseth. The King James translates this from what we call the Textus Receptus body of New Testament manuscripts and draws the word from the Greek word parabino. It's the idea of beside of the basis, or beside of the step, or a step to the side. In other words, it's stepping off track. But the English Standard, American Standard, translate it from another body of manuscripts and translate it from the word proago. We would call it progressive. And that seems to be the better original word here, proago, progressive. John says, whosoever is a progressive, whosoever just keeps on advancing in his progressiveness. And the linguistic key to the Greek New Testament comments that this may be John using a touch of sarcasm, because these Gnostics were claiming that they had advanced so far beyond their brethren. Could it be that John is saying, hey, whoever advances and goes beyond the doctrine of Christ? It's possible. Whosoever transgresseth and abideth not. The word translated abide, there's that word meno. The word that appeared so often in John's gospel account, it appeared so often in 1 John. It's the idea of to stay in a place or in a location. Whosoever transgresseth, goes beyond, gets progressive. The one that says, you know, the New Testament really wasn't made for it to be line by line followed in our modern world. It was made for that culture in that day. And we just need to use more of a sanctified interpretation, more of a holy application of it, but not just take it word for word. Progressivism. The new hermeneutic mindset. What God said, He said. He's not changed an I or a T. He's not undotted or uncrossed anything. It's the progressive mindset that says the Bible's out of date. It's the faithful mindset that says what God has said, He has said, and we will abide in the doctrine of Christ. John's point, verse 9, whosoever transgresseth and abideth not in the doctrine of Christ hath not God. This is not only the doctrine about Christ. Christ is come in the flesh, as was mentioned back up in verse 7. This is the doctrine of belonging to Christ. This is possessive. This is the doctrine that Jesus taught when He came to this world. Does it pertain to the truth of His existence and His coming and His dying and His rising? Absolutely. But it also pertains to the standards connected to His gospel. The doctrine of Christ is the doctrine the apostles taught. Acts 2:42, they continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. It was Jesus that told the apostles to teach them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you, Matthew 28:18 and following. The doctrine of Christ pertains to the truth, the gospel. Whosoever transgresseth and refuses to stay in the doctrine of Christ, he doesn't have God. The doctrine of Christ teaches the plan of salvation. What if I decide I'm going to step away from that? The doctrine of Christ teaches the pattern for the church. It's worship. What if I decide I'm going to step away from that and change the praise that we supply or the regularity of the Lord's Supper? The doctrine of Christ pertains to the pattern that God has delivered for the church's structure and organization. What if I decide I'm going to step outside of that venue of the doctrine of Christ because I think it's going to be better if a church has one man over the local congregation and then another individual over multiple congregations? The doctrine of Christ pertains to morality. What if I decide I'm going to get on my broadcast of whatever digital or analog nature it may be and start saying that the Bible really doesn't say anything about social drinking when 1 Peter 4:3 and 4 said we've had enough of that garbage? Am I abiding in the doctrine of Christ? What if I'm an influential brother who has my publication and my magazine and my shows and my whatever? It's not clout that determines soundness. John said, whosoever. The word translated whosoever, the Greek word is pos. It means everybody. Without the V, everybody. All. Anyone who transgresses, goes beyond, gets progressive, and refuses to abide in the simple, standardized, steady, unchangeable doctrine of Christ cannot claim to have God. But whoso abideth in the doctrine of Christ, he hath both the Father and the Son. Now this idea, conveyed in John 14:10, John 14:23, when Jesus said, if a man love me, he'll keep my commandments, and I and my Father will come in unto him, make our abode with him, we'll love him. He that abides in the doctrine of Christ, who abides in God's commandments, has the Father and the Son. I'm on God's side, and He's on mine. So, recognize untruth, because lying teachers will cause us to lose our treasures and leave the truth. Let's go ahead and move forward. Next section of the epistle, reject untruth. Picking up at verse 10, if there come any unto you, and bring not this doctrine. What doctrine, pray tell, do you mean, John? Just the doctrine that declares that Jesus has come in the flesh? No. The doctrine of Christ. Now keep in mind, John is talking about those that are teachers of false doctrine. John's not talking about your family members that haven't obeyed the gospel or that may be wayward. John's not talking about just the random stranger that might need hospitality. John is talking about those that are teachers of false doctrine that are devotedly perpetuating untruth. If there come one unto your house and bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him Godspeed. What's that mean? Neither bid him Godspeed. The word translated Godspeed is used 3 times in this epistle. Back up in verse 4, it's translated rejoice. Later in verse 12, it's a form of it is translated as joy. But here, neither bid him Godspeed. He that biddeth him Godspeed is particular of his evil deeds. We talk about the idea of reject untruth. The lovers of truth cannot accept liars. They cannot bid them joy. They can't take joy in the one who's teaching the false doctrine. They can't take joy in the one who is perverting the moral standard that Jesus taught. They can't take joy in the one who's trying to twist what the Bible has to say about the worship that God accepts. They can't take joy in the one that is teaching a twisted pattern for the church's organization, or a compromised idea of what it means to become a Christian and obey the plan of salvation. Lovers of the truth cannot take joy in untruth. We'll keep that thought in mind. We'll pick up here when next we meet. Our class is a bit shorter tonight because we're introducing the students. But we'll pick up here when next we meet and then move forward into 3 John. But thank you for your time and attention this evening.